Hello and welcome to the Planned Communities podcast. I'm your host, Preston Martin. This is the opening episode of a podcast series in which we will begin to explore the industry of planned communities around the world. As we speak with guests ranging from developers, community managers, investors, and more, we aim to get to the root of why planned communities are popping up across the globe, as well as how they work in practice. Today, we are speaking with Denise Gehrmann-Jimenez, the President of KITH Management Services. KITH Management is a planned community development and management firm centered in Austin, Texas. Denise joins us to explore her wealth of experience in the field of planned communities and homeowners associations in a city that has undergone significant growth over the last decade. Denise, thank you for taking the time to be with us today. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's a bright new day here.
Excellent. And just for the listeners, where are you based currently?
I am based just outside of Austin, Texas. I'm in Kyle, Texas.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, I know we were speaking before we started recording. I've got are out in Austin, and it's certainly an up and coming city that's experiencing a lot of growth and has been for a while, I think.
Yes, that's accurate. We've had a lot of growth, I'd say, for the past 10 years. It has never slowed down.
I think that's a big part of what we're going to be digging into today too. Kind of the space of planned communities as a whole, but also the context of Civic City, where a lot of these projects and communities are located. There's a lot of connection points there that I think are going to be interesting for the purpose of our discussion. So maybe just to begin, I'd love to hear, Denise, about your background and what got you into the development and operation of planned communities. So maybe give us just a quick background on yourself and how you got into everything, and then we can talk about KITH management as well.
Okay. Well, I have been in this industry for over 25 years, and I fell into it. I don't think anybody at that time ever really said, I'd love to be in the community management realm or any type of HOA. It was just not anything that people really spoke of then. But I was a paralegal and learned about an opportunity with a master plan community that was in a development stage. And they were starting back up. They really wanted somebody with legal experience. And I had some of that. So I was able to review legal documents and such. Well, in that role, I fell into an operations role and processes and developed a lot of different things for different types of components, because this was a community with commercial sites, also had a clubhouse, country club. It was gated with manned gates. There was a lot of moving parts. And that role definitely prepared me for the next, which would be going into much larger realm of the master plan and moving to Austin with a community that was built out at about 5,500 units, which is extremely large, with many more moving parts. And that is how I fell into this industry. It was just by chance, and I developed a love for it. And that's my story. I've been involved in a lot of legislative action committees, meeting with lobbyists and trying to get laws passed for both developers and on the builder side, and then the perspective of the homeowner side, because the needs are different. And that's, I think, what is so exciting about what we do is that there's a lot of moving parts, and everybody has to kind of figure out how to work together and weave all of these issues and all of the things that we want to do in a community, and kind of weave it slowly so that we can manage it and make sure that we're delivering exactly what the developer's vision is.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot I want to get into. With respect to the different stakeholders, and you mentioned kind of the different interests on the legal side, the different interests on the community members, and I think that's something we'll want to go into more detail on. But maybe before we do that, if you can say a bit about KITH management. So you mentioned that you just basically fell into the industry. How did KITH management get started? What was the transition process like between where you began in this space and where you are now?
So I was overseeing a large master plan community. I was on site. We were almost built out. I decided that I wanted to do some contract work and consulting as well. So I ventured into that world and decided that it was time for me to make a move. I felt like I had done everything I could do in that community and set everything up, and I didn't really feel like I was doing a whole lot to be productive at that point. So I decided I would venture out, and I did. Fell into a small boutique firm, which had probably about 20 communities that they managed, and they needed some help. So with overseeing some of the projects, so I stepped in, and we eventually grew it to 100 communities in probably 3 to 4 years' time. And the owners decided to merge and ultimately sell to a large corporate firm. Then I went to go work for the corporate firm in another market, which was San Antonio, just south of Boston, as the president there, and oversaw a huge team with over 300 communities and about 20 managers, and all of the moving parts would come along with that were also in that field. So I did all of that, decided, you know what, I think that I am better suited for the small consulting role where I can personalize things a little more. And I was feeling as if the need in this industry is that we have lost sight of the fact that this is a very personal industry. It is, yes, it's a business, and yes, a homeowners association is a corporation, and we must operate as such. However, we're walking this line of, we're talking about personal property and things that people, it's the single largest investment that most Americans make in their home, and they're very passionate about that. And I think we've grown so much, and just companies are so large that you're losing that level of personal service. We cannot remove that piece. And I really felt like that's where my skill set would help more, and where I could actually work with developers from the beginning and really set the communities up to be successful on the front end, and then help to evolve it as it grows and matures, because there is an evolution that happens from the implementation of one lot and selling that lot, building a home, then it transitions to a homeowner. And as you get so many of those, it changes, and the needs are different as you go through that process. And that's how KITH was born. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, though that makes a lot of sense. And, speaking of the kind of personal service layer, one criticism, if you find any, about planned communities that you'll hear from time to time, and yeah, it probably resonates more with some people compared to others. Opinions may vary, but you get a lot of planned communities around the world and in the United States, and the picture that people have in their mind is this very cookie cutter. All the houses look the same. The HOA is very strict, requirements for the length of the grass in your front yard, something like that. It's sort of like this blanket collective where everything is pretty much the same. Maybe you have services, rendered to the community as a whole, but it sort of has that cookie cutter look to it, and that obviously does not appeal to everyone. So what you're saying about that aspect of focusing a lot on the interests and the design of the homeowners themselves, and the prospective homeowners, I can imagine why that is incredibly important to the success of a planned community from the outset, from the vision part of the process forward. So what I'm wondering is if you can walk us through the process from vision to thriving community, let's say. You've worked in a lot of communities in and around Austin and San Antonio. How does the pathway weave from the vision of the developer all the way to like a living, breathing planned community?
So it's a good starting point. We'll definitely have a lot to talk about on this, but in the evolution of that would be a developer has a parcel of land. We'd love to go ahead and develop this for residential possibly some commercial sites, maybe with some condos as well. And that's where their vision begins. And I think at that point is when they decide, okay, what's it going to look like? What will it feel like? Do we want to have detached garages? What builders do we want? Do we want the exteriors to look a certain way? Do we want the cookie cutter look, or do we want it to look more like a custom home? That lies with developer and their marketing team, and obviously their sales research that would dictate what sells, what's selling now, what can we forecast and think about, what type of homes or developments are doing well. So they decide, and they basically will outline exactly how they want that done. When that occurs, there's the land planning that goes with it. It's the type of lots, the sizes, so that you can offer what we used to say is a community that can take you from birth at the hospital all the way to the grave. Can we develop a community like that? That means that you are servicing, medical service. You'll have some sort of a small commercial site with an emergency services center of some sort. You've got elementary school, possibly middle school, and maybe even a high school, depending on the size of the community. And then you'll also have everything in between. So you want to have an entry level section, which would be, smaller 40 to 50 foot size entry level lots. And you'll have other parcels in different sections where you'll have 60 foot, 70s, 80s, all the way to large acre tracts if you wanted to. But it's designed so that as a homeowner, when you purchase there, you don't want to leave. You're setting your roots and planting them so you're a newlywed, have your first baby, and then you can move into the larger home in the community. You move into a different section is what we call them. They're all different sections, and you don't want to commingle your 50s and 70s. So the planning for the land is very important. And what goes into that is also the expense. How much will it cost us to develop these parcels? And let's budget and forecast for those, and how quickly are homes selling so we can sell to builders. Because obviously, if you develop as a developer, you develop 300 lots, and the average sale is maybe 3 homes per month, you're going to have a lot of empty lots on the ground. So you want to deliver the right quantity to dictate how quickly those homes are going to sell by the builders and get homeowners in. So it's also a timing. There's a little trick there, because you also, as a developer, you don't want to end up not having lots completed and ready to deliver when they have finished their sales. So there's a lot of moving. It's like a bunch of levers. If you imagine them on a wall, it's, what's the perfect time and when will we do that? When do we pull this lever to release lots so that the builders can start selling in there? And so that piece of it is basic. And I think that kind of gives you a good overview of how that land planning process works. But then on the other side of it is making sure that once you set up the community, as soon as you have a certificate of formation, you must have your recorded documents, which means your vision has to be documented. Whatever it is that you're doing for these lots that you're building, and what's the general feel. In some documents, or as they say, we only want neutral colored homes. We don't want anything too bright, no yellows, no blues. All the roofs have to be exactly the same color or the same color palette. And most of them will even dictate exactly what that color is along with the manufacturer. And so all of those items are where I come in. I come in at the front and try to make sure that everything that their vision is, or what they have done in the past and want to copy or duplicate, is happening in those documents, because they're going to be recorded, and it becomes the legal recorded copy and the rules and restrictions that everyone must abide by. And if those are not laid out properly at the beginning, you can get into some hiccups later as the community grows and someone wants to paint their home, or they want to paint their fence and they want to do it in red. And we've said, no, it has to be brown. But if that's not outlined in your documents, we have a problem. And that's what I learned in my experience, is that somewhere along the way, the legal documents also became cookie cutter. You can order a cookie cutter set of documents, and unless you cater them to exactly what you want, you will end up with a set of documents that don't match your vision or what you're actually constructing and forcing builders to adhere to, it probably wouldn't be outlined in that cookie cutter set of documents they created. So, that piece is very important because it can be very expensive, in fact, to go in and correct whatever you've been doing in practice that has really been memorialized in that recorded document. So those components are really interesting, and we need to really focus on those items to make sure that everything is matching exactly what the developer's expectation was for the community. And so as it starts to grow, questions are, okay, when are we going to construct this amenity center? When is it a good time? We learned early on it's not easy to predict when a swimming pool should be built. We know that the developer is paying for things up front, and they realize that, and they know all of the initial first 3 years of development, they will be deficit funding the homeowners association that's been created to oversee the HOA aspect. And that being said, there's sometimes some breaks in that process, and you want to make sure that you've documented any type of rule that they think needs to be done. And I just lost train of thought.
So you walked us through how it has transitioned from the vision to the development plan, these documents that you're describing, to the construction phase. Are most of these communities, in your experience, greenfield sites that are developed modular format? So where we are trajectory at this point, are there people who are already living on plots that have been built, and then you're talking about kind of building on top of that modularly? So you have, say, like a row of homes, and then you're looking at developing an amenities already living there. Whereas most of this stuff usually kind of built out all at once, and then the people move in, and then occasionally there will be additional units, sections that are created on top of something that's already more or less complete.
Ideally, you start with an empty raw piece of land. So there's nothing in place already. So part of your land development plan and your master plan that you document will outline kind of what your vision is and where these lots are, and it'll show like where the future amenity site will be. So that component will come in. And so as a home buyer, when you are touring the community, you will see this master plan and you can see where things are located and what the vision is, but sometimes that does change, and it really just is dictated by whatever the market is doing, and if there's a need for more 50-foot lots versus 40s, they will modify that plan and it will change, and it can change. So it can morph into something else depending on what the needs are, and it could be what the needs are of the community. Maybe we need a larger facility and we need more land. So they will redraft that and go back and make those changes to change that plan. But the problem is if you build an amenity center too early, it will not have any use and it will be empty. And you're servicing this facility for a year and maybe you're getting 25 people a month using the pool, because a lot of people, it's interesting when you look at a community and how it grows, it's hard to know what type of buyer you're going to get. You can target certain types of buyers by doing different things, such as, let's say you want to do a lock and leave community where you only have to come home, visit for a while, it's your second home, and you've got everybody doing your landscaping. It's incorporated into your assessment. So that alone dictates a different kind of buyer. That is a different buyer who may not even use your swimming pool because this is a second home for them, or they're now retired and their needs are different. So it really just depends on how that community evolves to dictate when you should construct that facility to bring that in and begin all of the construction process for that amenity center.
That's a very interesting, and it begs the question: how often does the market profile, or this rather the customer profile that you're looking at, how often has that changed in your experience? So, like, let's say you design a community that's meant for one type of customer, one target demographic or whatever, and then it evolves over time to go from maybe more of a retirement focus, say, to more of a family, like middle-aged profile. How often does that take place, and how easy is it to track? Is it kind of like a sudden thing, or is it more like slow and organic over time?
It's slow and organic, really. It's happened where I could visibly and think in my mind 3 occasions where I know exactly that this occurred and it was completely intentional. And it's with the lock and leave. The idea for the developer was that this is going to be the lock and leave community. It's going to be set up as a condo. We're going to do garden homes. There will be no backyards. It's all going to be common elements, and there is no swimming pool. And this was their vision, and this is how they had this set in their mind of how this was going to develop. Well, it turned out that it was more retired people, not the second homeowner. It turned into a demographic of a lot of retired people who moved in who did not want to do any more landscaping, didn't want to deal with managing a landscape vendor or anything like that. So they really just wanted the ease of, I'm retired now. I don't want to maintain anything except for my home. And it turned into a community that was servicing the over 55 group without being dictated or recorded as a over 55 community, because certain different rules that apply there that you would have to set it up at the beginning, and you have to make sure that your processes include the age requirements. Well, this just happened organically. And I would say 65% of the owners there were retired, but not second homeowners. So they, at that point, decided we would really like a swimming pool. And that was not part of the plan. And unfortunately, it was too late to do that because there just wasn't any parcel of land that could be dedicated for that use. So interesting to see how that evolved. And it just turned into that type of community without the expectation that being the case. They really did expect that it would be second homeowners.
It's fascinating. Yeah. So kind of returning to the view of stakeholders and the development process of these planned communities. So you described how the vision is put in place and how there is sort of a kind of a supporting, let's say, template file for what you want and then the construction process, all of the documentation that informs that must conform to the kind of like centerpiece template, if you will. And you mentioned that being difficult in practice. So I was wondering if you could explain sort of the pain point with that. I can imagine there would be a lot of issues with legal fees, and is that something that is purely on the development side? So when it's going from vision to construction, or is that something that that the customer has to deal with? I was wondering if you could unpack that aspect a bit more.
It really occurs on the development side. So that component would be something that the development team would focus on / the board of directors, because now we've already got a homeowners association in place. So that's the focus there. And the other thing that I think is important to realize is that you can't just decide to put a pool in because you've already set your assessment rate. And assess rate is important when buying a home. How much are we going to charge the homeowners for the expenses within the association, for the assets that are going to be owned to the association? And one of the things that I definitely started doing many, many years ago is when a developer comes to you and says, how much should we set the assessment? Well, there's a lot of factors that go into that, and we have to ask those questions. And so I started doing build-out budgets. And what that means is I take all of the important pieces of the community, being what's the size at build-out, and what is the sales price of these homes? What are you thinking? Where do you think we're going to land? Tell me the types of amenities that you want to have, and I will plan out a budget taken from comparative communities that are similar in size with similar amenities and their assets and create a budget as if it were in this community and come up with those expenses as if it were completely built out. So every single home was sold, everybody was paying their assessments. This is what the expenses would look like if we had a swimming pool, clubhouse, basketball court, and we own all the streetlights and we own all the stop signs. All of those factors come into that budget, and all of that takes how much your assessment will be. So at that point, I can see, okay, this is what I'm projecting your expenses will look like based on this other community that I've managed before, and this is what they've expensed and what it looks like, and they're built out. Then we back into that assessment rate. So at that point, I have a number. I can just divide that by the number of homes that will be paying assessments to come up with what the assessment rate should be per year. And once you've got that in place, what's great about doing that is that one of the things you hear from a new home buyer, any home buyer, is, they sold me the house and they said my assessments were $25 a month. Well, lo and behold, here I am 2 years later, and now my assessments have gone up by 100%. I'm now paying $50 or more per month. And that was a very, very huge problem that you would hear a lot about the early stages of homeowners associations and how the assessment rate went up after a certain point in time. Well, this avoids that. I can tell you that I started this process using this build out budget, and I've gone back and looked at communities that I did this on 15 years ago. They are still paying the same assessment rate, have not had to have any increases.
Wow.
And that's really a big win. It's very impressive when you can do that in a community and have homeowners who can say, oh, ours have always been the same. I've been there for 10 years and we've never had an increase. So that's a win, I think, overall for the developer, the HOA, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing that I want to hear more of. I'd like to hear more of that. And the first thing is always something negative when you relate HOAs
right.
and talking to a homeowner. It's always negative. But
Sure.
in this situation, this system works. It really does work, and it can be done. And I think that, again, that's going back to starting from the very beginning and trying to do your best to set it up properly and forecast for these changes that might occur later.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that, at least as far as your company is concerned, you are more involved and have more oversight on the development process rather than the management of existing planned communities? Tell us a little bit about how that kind of bridges from one to the next, from the development and planning to the oversight and management of communities that already have people living in their homes and are accessing the utilities and services and everything like that.
Mm-hmm. So we manage both. I like to take them from their beginning and then raise them straight across and take them through that transition from developer board control to homeowner control. And that can be done very successfully and seamlessly if you are definitely being transparent with everything and engaged with your homeowners and kind of understanding what their needs are and being able to fulfill those is probably the most challenging thing. Is there's this misconception that we as the management company are pulling all the strings. So all these bad decisions or things that they think are bad decisions lies on the management company. And so I struggle with having to educate homeowners in that and saying, no, that's not how this works. I am engaged by the board of directors, regardless of who the board of directors is. So my contract is strictly with the homeowners association, and that board of directors is who I listen to and take any of my instruction from. And that board can either be developer employees or anyone they appoint to that board, because they have the ability to do that in development. And after a homeowner board takes over, when the developer is actually finished and they decide we are done, we can move on now, and they turn everything over, And at that point, we now have homeowners that can be elected to this board of directors. Now I take my instruction from those. So my instructions and my agreement are with the association and whoever sits in the seats as the board of directors. So we still manage all the other aspects and the day-to-day operations of that HOA. We take that completely off of the developer. So they do not oversee any part of that. They basically give us those deed restrictions and all of those documents that are recorded that dictate our daily operations and our duties. And anything outside of those is when we would need to engage the board and say, okay, I've got this situation, this is what's happened. But anything related to a homeowner will always go through the management company's office. You would never have a direct line to the board. It would be the management company facilitates all the day-to-day operations, and we try to handle all of the issues so that the board doesn't need to be involved unless it has escalated. So we still manage everything on the other side during this developer and KITH management relationship. It still coexists with the HOA. So it's a fine line that the management company walks, because we're in the middle of this line, and we have a developer on one side that we need to make sure their needs are met. And then we've got homeowners on the other side that we also need to listen to. And if there's something that has come up that needs changed, or we're listening to them and feeling like they would really like a pickleball court instead of a basketball court, it's my job as the managing agent to funnel that back up and say, okay, we're hearing a lot about that. And is there any way we can modify that basketball court, or maybe make it a dual purpose court, some way to figure out by what their needs are and what I'm hearing here from the community. So that's kind of how our role still acts in place. We're kind of in the middle as the mediator between both entities. And it's actually three when you think about it, because it's the homeowners, it's the board of directors for the HOA, and then it's the developer. So it's three different parties that we work with.
Gotcha. I see. Okay. And you mentioned the contract for a management company and overseeing these relationships. How long would you say is the average length of the contract in running these planned communities day to day?
I've seen them as 3-year contracts, and as of probably 7 years ago, they changed to 1 year, and with a tiny window opportunity for you to terminate the contract. If you don't terminate in that window, then it renews automatically for another year. That's the typical agreement that I've seen. We started when I was with the small boutique firm. We basically decided we're only doing a 1 year, and we'll give you a 30-day out. You can cancel 30 days as long as you've fulfilled your first year, and just give us the 30-day notice. And that's what I've built business on, the same concept. It's a relationship, and we have to work together as a team. And if you're unhappy with me, or if I'm unhappy with you, we should be able to separate and sever our ties. I wouldn't want to be stuck in a relationship where we didn't love each other or even like each other. So, I would not put myself through that. So I feel the same way. It's reciprocal. So if it's not working out on my end, we'll have that conversation. And if we need to part ways, then we will. But I feel like it should be that way. I don't think that you should tie anyone to your contracts for extended periods. Mm-hmm.
So I think we've gotten the kind of superstructure built from, if you will, from the vision through all the development and the different stakeholders therein, kind of some of the pain points, and how you typically overcome them. One thing that I'm curious about as well is what are the kind of suite of services that you guys will offer to the homeowners? Think of it as the kind of the basic pitch for coming to live in a planned community versus somewhere else. What are the amenities that they get? Why is it better for these homeowners to live in a planned community versus in some typical community? What does that basic pitch look like? If you will, sell me on the planned community life.
So I think that when you drive into a planned community, you're impressed. you will be impressed. If it's done well, it will be a community you want to drive into. Let's go look at this. This looks great. And you see the lush grass. You see that their landscaping is taken care of. They've got some really nice walls or fences that are maintained well. I think just like we eat food with our eyes, like we see it first, it's the same thing with a community. You're driving around, you're looking, and there will be the one that you like a whole lot and really want to live there because of what you've seen. So it's obviously the first thing is the things that you're seeing when you drive in. And so is it aesthetically pleasing? And if the answer is yes, then I think at that point, you need to decide, what are the offerings? Does this community offer the clubhouse that can be used for my birthday party? Does it have a kitchen service? Do we have any sort of a swimming pool? Do we have any sports courts? Do we have a trail system that is running through this community? The next thing that I think evolved a long time ago out of need for me was the fact that the proximity of the community to other things, meaning, where is this? And a lot of times in Texas, what you'll find is a developer will buy a parcel of land outside of the city limits. They don't really build within the city anymore. So they create these big, giant metropolis that's outside of the city. And that's how you get other suburbs. And so they go out to these other areas. Well, if they're the first community that's 20 miles outside of town, 25, you don't really have a grocery store. You don't have the conveniences that you would in another area. And that's happened in that really large community that I mentioned that had 5,500 homes. I had huge facilities, enormous. I had 4 pools with clubhouses. And in the early stages, people were just using them for swimming on the weekend or in the evening. And I had a large amenity that was empty all day long, right next to my office. And I struggled with that. And I approached the board and the developer, and I said, look, I think that we need to start thinking about bringing things in. And what I meant by that was, if I'm a mom, I have an elementary school here, but now I've got to drive all the way out 25, 30 miles to take my child to gymnastics or to cheer practice or to go do karate lesson wear. So what I pitched them on was, let's hire at that point, I called her a event coordinator. That evolved into a lifestyle programming person. And so that person's job was to create all of these experiences and these different events and hire people to come and teach karate or bring the school up the road and say, look, can you do this 2 days a week from this time to this time? Mommy comes over, brings her child here. She doesn't have to drive all the way out. That is a huge selling point for a master plan community. Huge. If you are a person who doesn't like to go out of your 5-mile bubble, which I am one of those people, and if that's how you live your life and it's so busy and your family's growing and you've got a lot going on and you don't want to leave, that is what a real master plan community offers you. It offers you the conveniences of these other things. And the master plan, by definition, would be that you're also incorporating commercial. So this community of 5,500 homes, if you drive through it now, there are, I think, 6 commercial pad sites with small restaurants, a small mini grocery store, like a mini Trader Joe's type of market. There's gas stations. There's a grocery store at the very front. All of these conveniences now, and you drive through this neighborhood and there are people walking or pulling a wagon from the grocery store or, riding their bike up to go have lunch or something. And they have all of these conveniences now, and a lot of them truly don't go out of that community. They've created this bubble, and the bubble is that you have everything you need right here. And that is definitely a plus. It's an amenity that I don't think people really think about, but when you drive into a neighborhood like that, you like it, and you would like that type of of neighborhood to be in, where you can bike and you have hiking trails and you have everything you need. And there's a lake at the end of the street. So it's just having all of those offerings in itself be very, very enticing for anyone that was out looking to purchase, if that is what piques your interest. And it's not for everyone. It really isn't. Some people don't like to come out and socialize. But I think the majority of folks do, especially after COVID.
Right. And would like to as with people who have kind of similar interests as them. They have similar stages of their life, similar goals and so on. I think that what you've described, when those appeal to you, you tend to cluster around other people who have that same kind of that same package that they're looking for in terms of their living arrangements. So yeah, I totally see that phenomenon and see the kind of the appeal of a planned community versus something that's a bit less structured. I know that one thing that we want to maybe close on here that we have to get into before we go is the effect of COVID on planned community space in the U.S. We spoke a little bit before we started recording on some of the impacts of COVID on this industry, and I'd like to get your take on how maybe as we kind of were going through the upswing for COVID, how things maybe changed and some of the effects that you're seeing now that we're hopefully, fingers crossed, kind of exiting the bigger impacts of COVID or the most immediate impacts of COVID on a planned community or on planned communities in general.
So on the master plan communities or any community that was accustomed to having these different kind of events and socializing activities, whether it be a holiday event or just a bridge club or some other sort of book club of sorts, all of that stopped. So everything was stopped. They had nothing that they could do. We could not coordinate anything for them and had this outside the box and try to think about opportunities for that. And what we did was we started to coordinate food trucks to come in. Every weekend we would have one or two trucks that would come through for a few hours and try to get them at least some of an engagement with people outside of their home where they were outdoors, social distancing. And so that was probably the biggest issue. And what we had is that everything closed. They couldn't go swimming. They had children in their home who weren't at school. Lots of temperatures were rising and people were very short fused. And we were hearing that a lot, to the point where there were people calling and complaining because the kids next door were being on the swing set and they're too loud, and I'm working from home and I can't get my work done. Those are the kinds of issues that arose, things that really were not a problem before. And we found ourselves having to really try and calm a lot of people down and try and navigate through these new issues that were coming up. And that was probably the most popular one, aside from, the nuisance of barking dogs and things like that.
Right.
But as we've evolved, the other thing that I noticed is that because people are working home, they really would love to have a place, a workspace outside of their home. So obviously, if you can afford it, you can add on to your home and build your own home office or add something, in the backyard if you have the space. But the majority of people don't have that. And I feel like what we're going to see next is that amenity center, that clubhouse that might be empty, you might want to make sure it has Wi-Fi and maybe set up a couple of freestanding workstations or places where someone could come and work for a few hours during the day and just get away from home. Because I don't think what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is that a lot of companies have learned we get more production from our employees who are working at home than we did before. And I think that expenses are lower. They don't have the expense of the overhead of the office. There's a lot of things that changed then. And I think that we're not going back to the normal we knew, where we need to pivot and figure out ways for a homeowner who is in a master plan community to be able to have a place or a space to work, escape your house and get some work done and still be within your head. And I think that is going to be one of the biggest changes that we'll see to our master plans and how we amenitize them.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I think that is a very wise decision, because one of the big trends that is in the process of being identified and tracked in this post-COVID era, let's say, has been the phenomenon of all of these people who have shifted to remote work or work from home as a result of COVID, and that phenomenon you just described, where companies have found that actually works better for their situation. And so you have millions of who are now working from home or working remote full time or more days a week than they're working in the office. And that affords them the flexibility to move and live more, or they feel their needs are met. So I'm curious to hear if you've seen so far more interest in the planned communities that you manage and work on, or more interest in the development communities that are built around this kind of customer model of somebody who has a lot more flexibility to move into something like a planned community, because they're no longer graphically limited as they used to be, and so they can kind of move around and everything. Have you seen that affect your business at all in and around Austin, given the huge interest in Austin as kind of a city where people are moving to from California, from the East Coast, et cetera?
I've seen a little bit of changes, and I would say probably in Austin proper, so within downtown. I think that you're seeing a lot more of that with the high rises. They have a little more space to navigate and kind of pivot if they want to change the use of one of their rooms, because they do. Usually the high rises have a bunch of different uses for different parts of their amenities there. And they do have the ability to make changes. And I've seen a lot of that occur where people are able to do that. But I think the biggest changes I've seen is now where we have commercial spaces that are converted to a working space of sorts that you pay for use. So you pay for each use of that space. And my communities, I have one right now, two that are actually haven't rolled out completely yet, and plans haven't been finalized. And one of the things that I have asked about and asked them to think about doing something like this, making sure that we have some way for a homeowner or a few homeowners to be able to come into a clubhouse and maybe design it so that it's a flexible space that can be used as a small work area, with maybe different corners of that facility where we could design it as such that people could come in and sit and work quietly and have quiet time outside of the office. Ideally, I think it'd be great to have just a whole row of workstations, similar to what you'd see in a library or something that people could utilize. And we could also use some of that during event programming. So it could be dual purpose. We can use it for different things, but that's kind of what I'm seeing. In a nearby town, I saw a great concept, which was a condominium community that's stacked. So it's 3 levels, and the bottom floor is either a hotel office space or it is just a home office space, however you wanted to use it. And then there's a private door to get to the 2nd and 3rd floor, which is where you live. And that is a great concept. I think that we need more of those. We need to try and find, builders who are willing to offer something like that, that's a similar type of use. So you've got, a space yours, but you don't have to buy a house for it, and you don't have to worry about paying for a landscaper or any of that upkeep. That's being done by the HOA on the exterior, and you just need to worry about your one space. And I think that that is an area that should be explored further, because I've only heard of one in Greenfield, and now there's one that is being designed now in Buda, just outside of Austin.
So wonderful. Yeah, no, I think that those developments are going to become more and more prominent, and it's definitely a theme of our research and our kind of review of planned communities and how they're changing in the advent of COVID, and the different kind of market developments taking place now and moving forward. So Denise, I'm wondering, because we're nearing the end of our time here, if you have any closing thoughts or any ideas that you'd like to express, any trends you want to identify, or any aspects of your business that you'd like to highlight before we close out for the day.
I think I would like to add a couple of things that are in my offerings for the services that I provide to our developing communities, and that is the builder component. When you're a master plan community, you're a developer and you're selling a lot to a builder, then the builder turns around and sells them to a homeowner. Well, in that process, a lot of times the HOA is removed from that aspect. But one of the things that I've implemented about 10 or 12 years ago is an architectural program, so that if the builder or developer or homeowners association wants to engage us, they engage us for this piece, which is we oversee all of the modifications. And a modification would be a homeowner who wants to paint their house or add a shed, and they have to go through a review process. And as a homeowner, you need to submit, and you need to know what to submit. And so we create all of the applications and provide all of the supporting documentation to the homeowner so that they know what to submit to our office. And then we are appointed as the reviewer for the association. So we review, as long as it falls within the parameters that are outlined in the recorded documents, we approve or deny per that set of documents. Those are our orders, and that's what we do. That is not a service that is offered by other companies. It's very few and far between. And through that, I've also expanded that so that a developer doesn't have to hire someone in their office to review all of the builder's plans. So again, we go back to those recorded documents and the vision and the design of what they want. Once I have that documented, recorded, my team will then meet with the builders, provide them with all of the parameters of what they can build. Then the builders in turn submit their house plans to my office. We review them. We manage where these homes are built, because a lot of your master plans will have guidelines on how many times you can repeat a certain house plan and how many times you can have the same colored house. And so we manage all of that, so that one, the goal is that we don't have the cookie cutter. We're trying to avoid the cookie cutter by managing what is being constructed and making sure that each home has its own character and the colors. You're not driving down the street and seeing 3 homes that are exactly the same style with all the same colors. So there's some diversity in that. And so my team also takes that off of their plate, and we oversee that component for them as well.
Excellent. Well, Denise, thank you so much for taking the time to review planned communities and their development, their operation, and the role that your company plays in each of those aspects. I think it's been very informative with respect to how this stuff works behind the scenes, and why planned communities are becoming increasingly prominent and why they're popping up really all over the country. So thank you once more for your time. And yeah, we really appreciate it.
Well, good. It's been great. I hope I was able to offer some good information that someone else can utilize, because we can never stop learning.
Absolutely.